some of my skills as an attorney like directly translate to podcasting. I know the answer to every question I'm going to ask already.
All right, so welcome to the You Are Lawyer podcast. Kenya Rothstein, how are you today?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, absolutely. So we were just chatting a little about how we met on social media and we saw each other's posts with different guests that I've had on the show. So would you introduce yourself to the podcast audience? Tell them what you do every day.
Yes. So I first have to say, I love how many connections we can have through social media these days, like how many meaningful connections. I find a lot of my own podcast guests through Instagram, which is so funny. But anyways, okay. So I am an attorney. I'm an environmental attorney. I do plaintiff side litigation work. And I also have a podcast called Thank You for Saying No. And we talk about how rejection can actually be a blessing in disguise.
Yes, I have faced a lot of rejection.
Me too.
I would not have called it a blessing when it happened, but give 14 months away from it and you're like, wow, that was the best thing that could have happened to me. So I grew up as a tree hugger. Like, I love to protect the earth. I have like 18 plants upstairs that I'm always watering and taking care of. I teach my daughter how to water the plants. And I wanted to do construction law so that I could restrict the type of permits people could have if they were not protecting the environment. And if that didn't work, I was going to go join the Army Corps of Engineers. I'm in Ohio now, but I went to law school in Louisiana, which has the third largest gas export plant. And I was like, I'm going to work for them and I'm going to make sure they protect everything. And what I didn't know was that they had a lot of lobbyists who were trying to get people like me to be on the other side. So yeah, it didn't happen, but that was what I wanted to do.
That's awesome. I love that.
What got you interested in being an environmental attorney?
So I knew from a young age that I wanted to work in the environmental field. I describe it as just this gut feeling where when you're working in a particular area, it just feels right. I don't know how else to explain it other than like a feeling in my gut where it's like, this is what I'm supposed to do.
Yeah.
And I had that at a really young age. I remember in high school, I took this AP environmental science class and I was like, this is it for me. This is what I'm meant to do, is like environmental protection work. And so I went to college. I majored in environmental studies and legal studies. And so I kind of discovered in college that I could make the biggest impact in the field that I wanted to work in by becoming an attorney. And that's not to say that, everyone has to be an attorney to make a difference, but it's just for me personally, that's how I felt I could make the biggest impact. So then I worked for a little bit actually before going to law school. And then when I got to law school, I was like, hit the gas. Like, I am ready to make a difference. I am ready to work in the environment. This is what I'm meant to be doing. So everything I did from that point on was pretty much environmentally related.
Yeah. So did you have internships when you were in law school that were environmentally related?
Yeah, I worked for the Environmental Protection Agency in Atlanta. And that was actually funny because that was during COVID. So I was actually not in Atlanta. I was in Miami, Florida, where I went to law school.
Okay.
And I worked for the Department of Justice in Washington, D.C. in their Environment and Natural Resources Division. And then I also worked for the U.S. Attorney's Office in Florida in their Environmental Crimes Unit. And then I did some nonprofit work as well on the side.
Okay, so environmental crimes, give me more. Is that like illegal dumping and stuff or what?
Yeah, I think it was so long ago. I'm going to be honest, I don't fully remember what we worked on because that was also at the start of COVID. So that got, but I think it was dumping. There was some cruise ship cases where cruise ships were dumping. That was like a big one right when I came in.
That's fascinating. We know that the environment is everywhere, literally. Like, your house is built on it. Your car drives on roads that's paved on it. But I think when you get down to like the minute part of it, you're like, yeah, it really is everywhere, right? Like, it was really windy here in Ohio this last week and my daughter's outside for trick-or-treating. And she's hitting this tree with a stick. And I'm like, that tree is alive. Please stop. Leave the tree
I
alone.
heard this story once about how we're all connected. I'm probably going to butcher it, but essentially the story goes like this. So there's two people in a boat and they're on opposite sides of the boat. It's more like a canoe boat is how I
Yeah.
picture it. And one guy is digging a hole into the boat, letting water in. And then the other guy on the other side without the hole is like, "What are you doing? Like, you're letting water in the boat." And the guy next to the hole is like, "No, I'm just doing it on my side." And that is such an example of the environment and how we all
Yeah.
are connected to it, because what one person does to negatively impact the environment actually really does affect all of us.
Yeah, absolutely. So, like, when I think of that and the weather, because I'm in Ohio, November 1st is
Mm-hmm.
supposed to be 43 degrees, you know?
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's all connected. It's all connected. I love that you are a podcaster and you're environmentally conscious and you're an attorney and you are from LA, but was in law school in Florida, working for the EPA in Atlanta, but it was virtual because of COVID, right? Like, I love that because it speaks to the resiliency of being a lawyer and being alive right now. Like you have to kind of go with the way things are going. Um,
That was a big thing for me in law school because I was in law school during COVID. The second half of my law
wow.
school career was like remote. And
Yeah.
so very quickly we had to adapt. And I took the bar, the California bar, in my apartment in Florida. So I was like, I think I took it from 11 a.m. to like 8 p.m. or whatever because of the time
Yeah.
change. So yeah, and honestly, COVID was such a good example of having to adapt. Like now that I'm actually practicing law, how quickly you have to adapt to how things change. I'm like, whoa, that was no joke.
yeah. COVID really changed my career because I started out in big law and I was at big law, and then COVID happened, but I was also pregnant. And so it changed a whole bunch of stuff. Like I see it as this whole like 180 switch. My daughter is 4 years old now, and people are like, "You're gonna have more?" And I was like, "I've never had a baby outside of a pandemic." Okay, Kenya. So you are also a podcaster, and I really appreciate that because I'm a podcaster too. And I feel like a lot of lawyers enjoy speaking, or at least they enjoy like hearing other people's story. But what was your reason for creating the Thank You for Saying No podcast?
I love this question. Thank you for asking.
Yeah.
When I was looking for a job after law school, I applied to hundreds of places and I really wanted to be back in DC, but it was a really tough market for me to break into, not coming from a DC law school.
Okay.
And there were also certain things I chose not to do in law school that made it more challenging for me to get a job like in DC basically. So I did not do moot court, I did not do law review because I was really ready to work on real things that made a difference. So I didn't
Yeah.
want to spend time doing anything but actual cases that were real, you know what I mean, in real
Yeah.
time. And so I knew going into that it would be harder to get a job, and it was. And so, you know, I knew. But I remember telling myself after every rejection, one day I'll be glad this isn't working out. Like I'll be saying, thank you for saying no. That was my sort of mantra that I would tell
Yeah.
myself. And so when I finally found a job in California, and thankfully it was in the environmental field, I was like, you know what? I think I should start a podcast called Thank You for Saying No, because I know I'm not the only one who experiences rejection and gets so frustrated by it. Because I say it lightly now, but during that time, it was really hard on me mentally and emotionally. I felt like I had to let go of this dream. I felt in a way like a failure and unaccepted. And it was a very challenging time. You also have like all this debt behind you. Like life
Oh
does
yeah.
not slow down. I still had to take the bar. Like it was a very rough moment in my life. Mind you, again, I was living in Florida. I didn't take the bar in Florida. So I was like, where am I going to live? Where am I going to go? I don't have a job. Like it's a lot. It's very stressful. And so, you know, when I finally came out of that moment, I was like, I'm definitely not the only one who goes through this. And I would really like to create a space for people to feel inspired when they're going through no moments, even if it's not just in the legal space, it's across all industries. We all go through it. And so
Yeah.
that's how the podcast started.
Yeah. And it's so empowering to hear stories of other people who have dealt with rejection and had other no moments. I love that you say that. It's not, oh, remember that time you were rejected? It's what was your no moment. Because it's
Mm-hmm.
more than just like, it didn't necessarily happen to you. It was a no moment. It's like, okay, well, that means something happened before and something's happening after. That was just a moment, right? Like, that's going to be my new framing for
Yeah.
everything.
I really like how you just framed that. It is just a moment.
Mm-hmm.
And part of that too is we have the power to turn the no into whatever it's supposed to be. So it kind of also helps us regain our power because in a moment, in a no moment, we can feel so powerless and like everything's spiraling out of control. But we actually have power in that moment to
Yeah.
turn that situation into whatever it's supposed to be. Whatever we make
Mm-hmm.
it is what it's going to be.
Yeah. And so, how many seasons or years have you been doing the podcast?
I just wrapped up season 2 a few months ago, and now I'm taking a little break to record episodes for season 3. It's not really a break because I'm like
Yeah.
working a lot on the podcast, but I'm taking a break to
Yeah.
record episodes for season 3 and guests on other podcasts. And we have merch coming out, a new line of merch and some giveaways and stuff. So trying to expand in other ways while I'm not recording episodes.
Yes. No, I definitely get it. I actually work with business owners to launch their podcast and then I manage them because I know I had to do that with my own show. I only show up right now to record and I have someone who manages everything else. And so once it worked for me, I was like, I could probably outsource this process. And I do. I try to get them to record like the whole season before it even comes out because it's life is gonna life. You know what I mean? And you need to make sure you still have your content ready. But Kenya,
Yeah.
I want to talk about, were you afraid when you started the podcast? Like, what was that conversation like when you were like, I don't care, I'm going to do it? Like, yes, I don't know. Yes, I don't know this part. Yes, I'm not sure about that. I'm going to do it. I don't care. What was that like?
Yeah, it was a little scary actually because my personality, and I'm sure a lot of attorneys and other people too can relate to this, but
Yeah.
my personality is I want everything to be perfect. I don't want it to look like like I don't know what I'm doing. And especially
Yeah.
now that I'm an attorney, I'm very cognizant of how I present myself to just the world, how I can be perceived, not just by listeners, but by other firms, by opposing counsel, by clients, by defendants, you know what I mean? And so I'm very cognizant every episode that I release, every post that I post. So, and that was a feeling I had at the beginning when I was still
Yeah.
even thinking about it. And so the conversation was very much protective of my how I'm portraying myself, but also wanting to stay true and genuine to the message that I was trying to create. So from the beginning, the message and the purpose of the podcast has been very clear in that I want to create like a catalog of episodes for people to watch when they're going through a dark moment. And so while thank you for saying no, the episode formats have taken different shapes and sizes and the way I can like engage with my audience has changed. The message has stayed the same. And so that was something in the beginning conversations that I wanted to be clear on. And that's definitely impacted like brand deals or companies or other collaborations that I do
Yeah.
because I'm very cognizant of maintaining the message and maintaining how I can be perceived by the
Yeah.
legal world. So that, yeah, that was definitely scary. And I will say too, I spent probably like a year prepping just for the first episode because I had never been on camera before. I usually do in-person episodes for our long form content. I record at a studio. And
Mm-hmm.
so I had to like get comfortable in front of a camera. Because I never did that, you know what I mean? And
Yeah.
so that took some prepping and stuff too. So I remember after I recorded that first episode, it was with Isla. She's an R&B singer, and she talked about, you know, her journey becoming a singer and deciding not to go to college and taking a risk and labels that didn't work out, record deals that didn't work out. That led her to her first record deal that really like jump started her entire career.
Yeah.
And like even just being able to say that so casually, like that took me a year. And she's someone that I know really well. So like
Mm-hmm.
so all that preparation for that first episode was insane. And then
Yeah.
after the first episode, I was like, oh my God, now I have to record another one and another one. And I didn't even have guests lined up. Like I put
Yeah.
all that work for the first episode, and I was just thinking, I'm going to figure out the rest as I go. And as long as I'm on the right path and I'm like meant to still be doing this, I know it's going to align and that it's going to work out. And it has ever since.
Yeah, and I'm so proud of you because it's not easy to create and it's very, very vulnerable to put your thoughts into the world for people to kick or love or yell at. Like it's hard to create. And to your point, lawyers are perfectionists, or at least we're typically high achievers. And we're used to being the best, and the stuff that we create and produce is the best. And so you're like, I don't want this to look terrible, but also I don't show people my flaws. Like I need it to be perfect because it's reflecting on all these different things. It's like the duality of being a lawyer and a creative, I think, is what you were explaining there, and you explained it really well.
That's exactly it. I remember I had friends who would say, just don't worry, just tell your listeners that you're going to get better, whatever, whatever. And I'm like, no, I want to be better from the start. Like,
We don't do that.
what?
We don't do that. Yeah.
But I've definitely had to get comfortable, like, growing in front of my audience and just allowing this to be a space where I can grow also
Yeah.
and get better and, not be perfect.
Yeah. Well, growing and getting better, but giving yourself permission to even create, right? Because I think that lawyers are extremely creative. We have to find the case
Mhm.
law, we have to make it relate. You know what I mean? You have to, the communication style with clients, whether internal or like your actual clients for stuff. I think all of that is creativity. And so I kind of like that I feel like you're the same way. You're like, no, I'm really creative. I just happen to work as a lawyer during the day.
Yeah, and it's interesting because some of my skills as an attorney like directly translate to
Hmm.
podcasting. So prepping for an interview, probably prep too much for interviews when I do the in-person ones at the studio, like I know the answer to every question I'm going to ask already. And I know their whole story. I know how to navigate from like this point in their life to this point in their life. So it's very much like prepping for a deposition
Hmm.
or a trial exam. Like that's how I prepare for my podcast interviews. Although
Yeah.
I will say the interview doesn't feel like a deposition or a trial examination. But that's how I prep for it, and I make sure like I know everything. And so it's
Yes.
really interesting because those skills, I think I did my first podcast episode before I did a deposition. And so it was
Okay.
interesting, like getting ready for the deposition. I was like, oh, you know what?
I've done this.
I got this.
Well, that's what they teach us in school. I didn't do moot court, but I did like a mock trial type thing or like a course. And one of the teachers was a judge, and they were like, you do not ask a question you don't know the answer to. You don't. Now, that makes it really difficult when you're dating because you're trying to go in and meet people afresh. But yeah, for
Yeah.
things like this, for interview style shows, you absolutely should know a lot of the information. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I mean, I think when you were talking about creating the show and you were like, how do I do this? And it took a year to get ready. Everything is figured out a bowl, but you still need that time to figure it out. So I respect the fact that you spent all that time to prepare for even that first recording.
Yeah, I remember during or shortly after that time, I can't remember if it was before or after. I'm pretty sure it was after, but I would go to podcast conferences too, and I still do, just to get a better understanding of the landscape.
Mm-hmm.
Because podcasting is a really big industry and there's a
Yeah.
lot of money in it. And it's also really hard to tap into the money part of it. And there's just, even though there's a lot, it's also really hard. And most people don't make it through, a few episodes. And so
Mm-hmm.
I really was trying to understand like what was even going on in the podcasting industry because I
Yeah.
also didn't want to be taken advantage of because I just didn't know. So
Yeah.
I was just at podcast conferences and stuff. But it's interesting because at podcast conferences is where I record most of my short form content. And those are 5 minute or less episodes called Rejection Reflections, where we
Mm-hmm.
talk about someone's no moment in like 5 minutes or less. So if I meet someone and they like the podcast, we talk about their no moment really quick, and then that's an episode in itself. So it's
Yeah.
interesting how like I think that's an example of what I mean by the podcast aligning. Like I didn't intend for that to happen when I was at these podcast conferences just trying to learn, but it ended up working out anyways.
Yeah. I'm a big fan of podcast conferencing. I used to write for a podcast newsletter, and I was like, this is how I'm going to make sure I don't quit, right? Because I told my friends I wanted to start a podcast, and someone sent me a book called So You Want to Start a Podcast. And it said that most people quit after 7 episodes. So I was already a lawyer, and I was like, okay, I got to record at least 10 before I launch. And then I read something
Yeah.
that said that most people drop off around 21. And I was like, nope, I'm doing 25. And then I'll put it out there. But yeah, I try to get involved with the podcast community. Like I would start writing for podcasts. I just spoke at a conference, and then I just put in a pitch to speak in January at Podfest.
Yeah. I might go to Podfest, actually.
Okay.
It's on my list of things to check out and look into. So that would be cool if we met in person for the first time.
It really would, because I just released the 165th episode, and I've probably met 10 of those lawyers, because everybody gets referrals and stuff online. Like that's just the way the world works, which is funny because I launched in April 2020, and I had no idea the pandemic was, you know what I mean, coming. Like I was like on Zoom trying to figure out how it worked, and now everyone is so proficient with it. It was like a happy accident, because I hadn't thought past those 21 episodes. Like, how am I going to find people to do this? And it kind of just worked out. So
it just works when it's meant to be. It aligns. It works out in a way you can't even explain.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have 2 questions for you. So Kenya, you said that you love being an attorney, but you would not attend law school again. Can you give us a little bit more detail about that?
Yeah. That was on my form, huh?
Mm-hmm. Is it because of COVID or what?
I personally was so ready to make a difference right away. And I was getting frustrated in law school that so much of your time, like 3 years of your time, is spent on things that you can't make a difference right away. Okay. And so I think part of my frustration in law school was that I just was so ready to make a difference now, like back then. And then having come out of law school, I was like, all those 3 years basically served me nothing in practice. And so that was really frustrating coming out of law school as well.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, granted, I didn't expect to be a litigation attorney. I thought I would be doing more administrative side, like maybe working for the EPA or something, and they don't do litigation on the EPA side. If they have a case that goes to trial, they send it to the DOJ. So I don't know. Either way, I thought I would just be doing more administrative stuff, not litigation like I'm doing now. So I didn't really prep in law school to be doing litigation.
Okay.
But that being said, I don't think it would have made a difference because law school prepares you for the bar. It does not prepare you for practice, in my experience, because, man, that was a dark time.
I mean, a lot of law school is really theoretical. And to your point, you're like, where's the practical stuff? But even if you had done all the practical administrative stuff and then you still ended up in litigation, you still would have ended up not being prepared. So it's really just one of those hoops you have to jump through, a hoop that is on fire with the lion chasing you, a hoop you got to jump through just to get to becoming an attorney. But law school administrators who are listening, work with us. Like there has to be a different way. Even if you cut it down to like a year and a half or maybe 2 years, like there's got to be a way that we could change that. And then last here, Kenya, what would you say to law students and young lawyers, 5 years practicing or less, about what they can do with their law degrees?
You can be more creative than you think you can. And I'll say an example as from my first year of being an attorney was really hard because I felt so incompetent and like I didn't know anything. And every time I got a question or an assignment, I was like, what is going on here? Why don't I know anything? Like, why is every single word in the like assignment email, it's basically a different language. I have no idea what we're talking about. Like, it was very challenging mentally on me. And so I think as you're graduating law school and starting your first year or even in your first few years, like give yourself some grace and like, you know, more than you think you know. It might take you a second to figure out what the words mean. Like Google will be your friend and that's okay. But
Yeah.
really, like, you do know more than you think you know. And something that I tried to do so that I could still feel like I was contributing instead of just saying, like, I don't know what this is, I don't know what that is, like, suggesting something. It's like kind of like when you were in elementary school and the teacher was like, show your math, like,
Hmm.
show your work so I know how you got. So I would literally do that when I got an assignment. I would show my work and I would just be okay being wrong, but as long as I like made an effort to show what the answer was and why I think the answer was, so then
Yeah.
the partner could point out where I went wrong or where I didn't. And honestly, a lot of the time, like, partners don't know either. And so they're asking you because they don't know. So like, it could be them writing a potential interpretation with an explanation, or it could be you. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? So I think just remembering to give yourself grace, you know more than you think you do, and just like show your math to the partner so that you can learn better, and they can point out where you've been a little like off track or something. Like, it's okay to be wrong
Yeah.
internally.
Yeah, absolutely. Everyone is still learning. And even if you knew something or you're the experts where you're the partner, the law is always changing. So it's
Hmm.
always, you're always going to be learning something new. It's always important to show your work. So I absolutely love that. And thank you so much, Kenya, for coming on the show. This has been great.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I had a great time today.
Yeah. The podcast audience is like 70% young lawyers, like 5 years practicing or less. And then the other 30% is law students who just want to hear about careers. So I think they're really going to be excited to hear from you. Thank you again. And I hope you have a great rest of the year. Bye.
Thank you.